Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we've got Jason Rubinstein. He is the Chief Transformation Officer for Advanced Group. We're going to be talking about change, innovation, and of course, transformation. Work Inspired starts right now. Jason, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and talk a little bit about what you're doing and give us some insight into the world of transformation.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
So tell me your story. Who's Jason Rubinstein, and how did you get to where you're at today?
It's been a fun ride. So really, I started off my career with this altruistic idea that one should only do what one loves. So I started off in the music industry. I was a musician, went to music school, found myself in the record industry in New York City in the early 90s. And then I realized I wanted to leave New York. So I went out to the West Coast, was still working in the music industry, but realized that my inner nerd needed to come out. And so I had always been into video games and wrote some basic games when I was a kid, like a lot of people did when computers first started. And I basically talked my way into my first job in the video games business. So this was in the, I think it was 94, early 90s. So we're talking AOL. There's no real internet yet, but communities. And I was just fascinated by the possibilities, but that you also had game consoles and networked video gaming was just barely starting. So I found a job at a big games company called Sierra, which at the time was $1 billion publicly traded games company that had this startup online games division called the Imagination Network. So that's really where I got started. And that opportunity kind of was a dangerous and exciting thing because it showed me, wow, Silicon Valley, I was in San Francisco at this point, you can sort of spin a yarn and get a job, but at the same time, you actually have to step up and do the work. And isn't it cool that there's a big company investing in something new that wasn't necessarily ready for prime time yet? So this entity had venture capital in it. AT&T was an investor in it, and it was hard, but it was fun. So that for me became the blueprint that I've replicated in different ways throughout my career. Where if I fast forward, so I spent about 11 years in California, a little bit in LA, but back in San Francisco, in different roles in the games industry. Some of them were corporate. I was the games evangelist for Intel, probably the coolest title I've had.
Games evangelist.
Yeah,
wow.
It was a neat role. And worked at a couple of big publishing companies, Ubisoft being probably the most famous one, and started up their online division. But then kind of phase two of my life and career converged. I got married. We had a couple of kids, and my wife also worked and works today. And we decided we didn't want to stay in the Bay Area. And so we love the Bay Area, still have a bunch of friends there, but we didn't want to raise our kids there. And she was from Wisconsin. And so I hadn't read the fine print that if you marry a Wisconsin woman, you might end up in the Midwest. So we did something most people don't do. I quit my job. Crazy thing to do with kids. Sold our house. She kept her job because she was working remotely. And then phase two, this is like 2005, became about what could a life be in Chicago that involves technology, but that is more balanced for us, from a sort of, family standpoint.
Sure.
And so over the next several years, I found myself at places like Motorola, which was disrupted by the iPhone. And there's an interesting story there if we get to it. Redbox, called a transitional, but still very large scale at the time, movie industry disruptor. That since things have played out interesting with Netflix and streaming. But led innovation there. Worked at some other companies, huge companies one wouldn't necessarily know, like in the networking space, a startup, and then eventually found myself at Advanced Group, where I started 7 months ago. And so really over the past 15 years, what I've sort of come back to is product development, innovation, technology, and that sort of repeatable pattern that started way back, in San Francisco in gaming, was really around just being excited about how technology is going to change things. What are you going to do about it from a business standpoint? Are you going to invest? And I have found sort of a safe haven of being at medium to large size companies that are willing to make those investments. So I've worked in startups as well. So that's sort of the very broad Reader's Digest version.
That's
of
a great,
my
I mean,
career.
that's a lot of well-known, exciting brands and companies that you've had a chance to work for. And I'm interested to kind of unpack your perspective on the different cultures at those companies, or,
Sure.
as it relates especially to your current title of Chief Transformation Officer. Those are innovative companies. How, what did you see that was successful? What did you see that maybe you talked about Motorola and the iPhone? What did you see that was a challenge that wasn't overcome, or that was, an obstacle? Before we get there, tell me a little bit about Advanced Group. What does your company do, and why did you decide to take a job there?
Sure. So Advanced Group, been there 7 years, so hopefully I'll get this correct. The Advanced Group is 4 companies that are the ones that we operate through. So we work in the staffing and like professional solutions space. So to explain that, the first one is called Advanced Clinical. That's really the 800-pound gorilla. That's a major player in what's called like in the clinical research space.
Okay.
So we work with pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical companies that are doing phase 1 through 4 of drug trials. So right before the FDA would say, go for it, that's where we're working. And these are roughly 10-year life cycles to do drug development. That's a really, we're a private company, but I can say it's, in the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue.
Wow.
Profitable and growing and global. So that's sort of the big kahuna. The idea of staffing and solutions also applies to some other industries that we're in. The next company is called Katina Solutions.
Okay.
Katina they focus on supply chain, but specifically like in the food and beverage space. That's been the niche that they've found that's working well. And then we have it's actually a pretty well-known brand called Wonderland that services roles, so like creative marketing roles, product design roles, those types of things. Interestingly, being disrupted by what's happening, with AI. There's a lot of talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the fourth and final area, it's a really interesting business called Advanced RPO. Basically, it's like an all-in-one organization that sells, staffing and resourcing services to a company that would like completely outsource it to us. So at a high level, it's staffing and solutions. It's 35 years old. It's a private company. It's owned by one person, one family. Really neat company. I've been in Chicago for the whole time.
Cool. What's it like working at Advanced Group? What's the culture like?
Yeah, it's at this stage in my career, that was very important to me because I've seen the big corporations. I've been laid off. I've laid people off. I've got some well-earned scar tissue and some trophies, but lots of scar tissue. And so culture was really critical for me. And really, it starts with the top. With Leo Sheridan, who's our founder and chairman and group CEO. He really espouses a culture of servant leadership, and that is very powerful if it's done correctly, and just very people focused. And so the culture at this company is you've got a ton of people who are really loyal, been there for years, which is terrific. Deep subject matter expertise, amazing relationships with customers. So like the NPS scores, are off the charts compared to our peers. And now that I've been there for a while, I can understand why. And then lastly, very modern for a 35-year-old company, very focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and not just as an ESG report, but like deeply committed to it. Internal employee groups that do all sorts of things. And it really shows in the pride people have at work.
Very cool. And those different business units that you talked about, are you kind of do you guys collaborate together in one space? Or are you dispersed? How is it kind of structured as far as
Yeah.
how you work together?
Sure. So the companies operate through shared service platforms. So
Mhm.
nothing magical about that structure. Each one has its own CEO.
Okay.
So relative independence from that standpoint, but a lot of commonality, common platform, stuff like that. Like many companies that have been around for a while, plenty of office space.
Yeah.
But as a staffing and solutions company that operates in, you know, over 20 countries around the world, we have to find a way to have, entities and offices where we need them and not where we don't.
Sure.
So, we have a headquarters in Chicago. We have a, Advanced Clinicals headquarters is up in Deerfield,
Okay.
around here. And we have some other offices in the United States, but it's been, like many companies, contending with, well, do we need the space? Where are people? And the people piece has just evolved quite a bit, with talent becoming like this as opposed to just like this.
It's especially interesting that you're a company that deals with placing people.
Yes.
So like so tell me, are you currently in a remote environment, a hybrid environment?
Hybrid.
Hybrid. Okay.
Yeah, we're hybrid, and it's an interesting genie. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, as the saying goes, it's hard to put her back in. And so, but for certain positions, especially in our space, what we call producers, these are people that are like sales folks, customer success folks, working with clients. There are certain roles like that where you have to just connect face to face and have these kinds of interactions. But for many other types of roles, it's such a great thing that now, like I think about innovation, right? In the old days of pre-COVID, many companies have innovation labs or incubators or some version of that name, and it was some cool office space where they had all the toys and all the food, but you had to go there and live there and work there, and that was great. Now that whole model is busted apart, and so and we're not special in that sense. Like we've got people that are just all over the place, but it has allowed us to just get access to talent that you couldn't get access to before, which is just terrific.
Are a lot of the roles that you're placing people in, you talk about pharma research, are you seeing, I mean, clearly during the pandemic, there was a lot of, some of us were forced to be remote, right? And now a lot of the companies that we talk to are trying to navigate what is the right mix.
Yeah.
Most are hybrid, right? When you're placing people, is it very industry specific, or are you seeing any sort of trends on companies saying, on even just listings for remote or hybrid or in person?
Sure. It does get very industry specific.
Okay.
So for example, if I think about Katina, Katina is essentially a restart of a business that we sold last year in the supply chain space. Katina has found just amazing traction for food and beverage companies, and particularly for companies that are looking for, ironically, with my job, transformation and innovation type people. Those people can be sourced from anywhere. But if you go, switch over to advanced clinical, highly regulated, like highly regulated, of course, and has to find people that are, if you start with doctors and researchers, they have to have certain specialties. Then you think about how clinical research works. And you've got sites that are selected, and those sites are literally locations. Then they're handing out drugs and they're doing research. And so then that's very, very, very location specific. Yet technology is disrupting all that. So in the clinical space, DCTs, decentralized clinical trials, that's a very big thing. That's an evolution. So it really gets down to what industry you're in, and what's needed for that industry at that moment.
Yeah, and it seems that there's a balance between, clearly the benefit of a remote hire is that you've got a much larger talent pool. When we were looking for guests for this show started during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We could reach out to anybody because we didn't have this in-person initiative to do it together.
Yeah.
But then you balance that with the quality of the conversations are better when we're together. Like you lose something when it's over Zoom. And I think that I'm just drawing a parallel between this podcast and working.
Yeah.
I know some jobs you can very easily do over Zoom, but you're right. The target guest for our show is shrunk because we're saying Chicagoland, because we want to do it in person. So it's an interesting balance that all companies are trying to find. Well,
Yeah.
not all, most companies are trying to find. I'm interested, the role of Chief Transformation Officer, how long has that been a title at Advanced Group?
Yeah. 7 months.
So since you started.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the first.
That's right.
Okay, so when that role was created, how was it defined? Like, what is the Chief Transformation Officer supposed to do?
Yeah.
Transform.
Yeah. Yes, and as we say in Chicago, it's a few things. So let me give you a slightly nuanced and longer answer to your question.
Okay.
When Leo and I were talking about Leo, our founder CEO, we're talking about it. Being a product guy at heart, I was like, well, what problems are you trying to solve for? What is it that the company? What do you want to do? What are the threats that you're worried about? What are the opportunities that you want to pursue? Let's start with that, and then let's come up with a position that addresses that. So that was the first thing. Second thing is the word transformation, like a transformation officer role. It's kind of become what innovation used to be. It's become. I think I've seen it as becoming emerging. It's becoming more popular. Digital transformation was a role that we saw. I'd say at least for 10 or 15 years. But now, so if you go look up the big consulting firms, they have transformation practices. They're largely, as you would expect, consulting groups. They bring processes and tools. But they're not doing the actual work necessarily. They're saying, hey, we're going to help you do the work, and here's our toolkit, and you're going to pay us a lot of money for that. So mash all that up. For us right now, the role didn't exist. There has been no innovation work as defined as innovation. The company's innovative. It's done all sorts of really cool things, but it was never structured as a formal function. And the strategic planning aspect of it, short versus long-term strategy, was largely Leo and the CEOs managing each of their respective businesses. So that was the setup. And so what we figured out was, let's create a hybrid version of this and call it transformation. So it's it starts with strategy. So what's short versus long-term strategy? We have this incredible board of advisors that would put any public company's board to shame, but as a private company, they operate under the radar. So it's how do we work with them and think about the future of where we're going. The second leg of the stool is transformation. I'll use lowercase t there. So again, this gets into typical transformation that you would see at bigger companies and offered by the consulting firm. So it's how do you optimize your business practices, your processes? How do you grow your top line revenue? How do you become more efficient? I think the word transformation is just a newer version of words that have been around for some time regarding improving business. It's just it's sort of branded, if you will. And then the third and final piece of it is the innovation piece. So that's how where you have permission to work outside of the day-to-day boundaries. You have a different time horizon. You've got different expectations. By the way, it needs to fit into your long-term strategy and ideally drop opportunities into your transformation work. So that's why we set it up this way.
It makes a lot of sense. When I think of the word transformation, I think of change.
Yep.
How much of your time is spent reacting to or dealing with change?
Yep.
We talk about problem solving, right?
Yep.
Versus disrupting and creating change.
That's an awesome question. It's all I think about. Because for me and for my team, we're strategically we're accountable for thinking about the future and not being blindsided. So like when I think about innovation work, it's really about future proofing. So how do you be the disruptor as opposed to being disrupted?
Yeah.
How do you anticipate what's going to happen in your ecosystem? Maybe you even cause that change in your ecosystem as opposed to waking up and reading something in a blog or the Wall Street Journal going, holy crap, I had no idea e-commerce was going to take off so fast.
Right.
Or AI was going to do this to my workforce. So when I think about it, I think about it in terms of time horizons. Horizon 0, today, Horizon 1 tomorrow. what are the things that, and this is like the lowercase transformation, what are the things that we should really start to do now that we have control over, that's going to help our business over the next 12 months? You know, that's relatively straightforward, hard, but things that are within our grasp and our resources to be able to do. You know, you get to Horizon 2, Horizon 3, further out, well, that's more innovation. You know, what are the things that you need to invest in, take some risks experimenting, you know, depending upon your methodology that you have. So for me, my whole life at work is thinking about change.
Yeah.
But it's cut across these different time horizons, and then it's either resourced or it's not.
Because I think a lot of what you're talking about sounds like, at least, well, I would say at most size organizations, the role of the business leader. And so I think where the chief transformation officer makes a lot of sense is that the CEO is also getting bombarded with needs of all different functions. And so by separating that role out and looking at transformation and change from that perspective, you can only focus on it. You said that's all I think about. That can be your focus. I guess my question is, how do you measure it? I mean, like you talk about getting caught by surprise. Do you say next year success in this role means we're only going to get caught by surprise one time? You know, like how do you put a KPI around the job function of transformation?
So back to your comment about the CEO. So again, excuse me. So the transformation function, it's really, I think of it a lot as an expertise and master of a process. And it's a way of thinking that, you know, I'm trying to imbue into the company.
Okay.
So that, you know, the CEO of the clinical business and, you know, our other business leaders, they have a toolkit for how to think about something, because work is to figure out what's the process that works for us. So it's really trying to empower people and at the company to understand what innovation is versus transformation, and to have the tools to say, I'm just as an example, I just read about this technology that could really disrupt the way we're doing trials right now. Maybe we should think about that. And then what do you do with that? Do you write an email? Do you put it into an idea portal? Do you bring it to a big kickoff or ceremony? So in other words, it's about making sure that people have the tools and the permission, most importantly, to be able to bring these ideas or opportunities or friction into some structured universe.
Okay. Is there a component to the role then that is coaching? It's something that I always think about when it comes to innovation and transformation is nature versus nurture. I think of it with creativity as well. How much of it's a skill that you can hone and develop and teach versus something that is a personality trait or, you know, a state of mind, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to go back to your KPI question too, because that's a really critical one. But to answer this one, innovation is not for everybody. You know, there's all sorts of personality tests. You know, we use one called the predictive index. It's a statistically, you know, valid approach for quickly, you know, assessing, you know, people's personas. And not everyone's cut out for it. It's hard, you know? And so I do believe that there are some folks that are have a predisposition to do this type of work. You know, these are risk takers. This is half of Silicon Valley. These are people that are, you know, putting their butts in a flagpole, raising money that's not theirs in many cases, and they've got a strong thesis and hypothesis. So that's a very concrete personality type, and that personality type, you know, is in startups, it's in corporations. Part of that's me. I've got a dual personality. That's one of them. Is that, you know, that sort of burning entrepreneur, and then the other side of it is the people who would like to do that, but they can't, either because they're just not comfortable doing it, or and then this middle group that they might be able to do it, but they just need the tools. And again, I come back to the word permission, huge word in, I think, doing innovation work. And that's where there are a ton of different frameworks and methodologies that have emerged. Many of them really over the past 10, 15 years they've, to reuse the word, they've mashed up, and there's essentially a few ways that I've seen that the innovation is being run at companies these days. But but that middle group of people who they're not born entrepreneurs, they're not that afraid that they want to throw their name in the hat, they don't know how. That's where if you have a solid process and the company has built a culture that's going to support it, then you can just get so much productivity out of people and not just have your crazy entrepreneurs doing all the work, but bring many other people along into your innovation work.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm thinking like not all companies would be at their best if everyone at the company was entrepreneurial, right? It works in Silicon Valley, but there's also challenges that come with that, right? I mean, there's how long is the person going to stay at the company? Like how are we creating enough opportunity? Who's actually going to do the work instead of just thinking of all the the new ideas? So I like the thought that it's not for everybody, and that's not a bad thing, but it's also necessary and needs to be intentional. And so someone like yourself can help encourage it in those who might be waiting for permission to be innovative. That's cool.
Yeah, that's right. And to add on to that, one of the challenges I've seen over many years of doing this is how do you bring people along, right? So, because like and I've been in some roles where innovation team was started, everything looked great in the PowerPoint slides, and then the real job started, and you realize, oh, those people on the executive team, they actually really have no interest in the job you were just hired to do.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about that? Because you're taking budget quotes away from them. And why should we invest in things that might not ever happen, or they're going to be 2 to 3 years out before they deliver value? And these are human corporate emotions, right? So it starts, does the company have the right structure? Does it have the right culture? But then how do you bring people along? So whether it's innovation contests or and being very transparent with what you're doing, so that people may go, yeah, they're taking more cash out of the business this year for things that aren't going to happen, but you know what? It's like special forces. Thank God they're there doing the things that I don't want to know about, or I want to know a little bit about, because they're protecting us. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah,
but with more transparency, to be really clear. These aren't black ops and faraway lands. This is like, no, we're going to share so that you can be a part of it, but we're not going to make you do the work.
Yeah, change communication.
Yeah.
How do you, because a part of that is also, and you just touched on it, it's that idea of getting really excited about something. How do you intentionally put time in to make sure that it's not just a temporary, oh, this is such a great idea, is sometimes a time a barometer for how sticky a new idea will be? You know what I'm saying? It's like I've had a number of different ideas that I got really excited about, and then after a week I'm like, that's not that good of an idea. So like when you're thinking about transformation or change, and this goes back to the KPI question, how do you measure it? How do you qualify it?
Yeah, that's great. Let's go back to that. That's probably one of the most critical things that anyone who's an innovation practitioner or leader is obsessed about. So first of all, it starts with what expectations have, as the innovation lead, what expectations have you negotiated with the company? You've got 3 years, $10 million, and I want to see 3 things that are going to have this kind of impact. Or is it like, nope, you've got a bucket of money, have fun, or hopefully something in between, right? But it truly starts there. And that's where I've seen all sorts of interesting and weird and awesome and bad behavior just on that one governance piece. But it starts there. So let's assume for this illustration, great governance, everyone's on board, there's a budget, and you're free and clear. Then it gets into, okay, how are you going to do this work? Where things have evolved today, and this will get to the KPIs. How it's evolved today is, and it really mirrors software development's changed over the past 20, 25 years, where it used to be huge requirements documents, millions of dollars, hope we got it right, see you in 3 years, and then, oh no, or oh yes. Now everything is about, increments, do things quickly, test, build, measure, learn, which comes from the lean startup methodology. do things in increments so that you can very quickly validate or invalidate what you're doing. And that idea, most startups apply that methodology just out of the gate. But corporate innovation, which always tries to emulate startups, and make no mistake, that's the whole point. Like many corporate innovation groups, they're just trying to be a startup factory.
Right.
But to take the best of what startups do and bring that into this protected corporate environment. So it's about small increments, and then ultimately, I boil it down to two things. You're either solving for pain. What are your pain points? Or what are the opportunities that you're seeing out there that you've got a strong hypothesis about? It really starts there. And then your KPIs are all going to be driven by whatever you're trying to solve for pain, or whatever opportunity that you believe is out there from a market standpoint.
That's a good answer. And it makes a lot of sense. When it comes to, I mean, we talked about disruptive technologies quite a bit this season.
Yeah.
Are you finding it a challenge with the pace of some of these things like AI? Like if you a year ago said, we're going to put our plan in place for the next, you call them horizons, but like even 12 months, you get 6 months in, you're like, whoa, like how often do you have to pivot, or how often do you have to, how short are your planning cycles, I guess is what I'm saying. Because it seems like change has always been here, but the pace of change is accelerating and continues to do so. And if you look at the exponential, the Moore's law of disruptive tech, it seems very steep, right? Like
Yeah.
It's coming quick. So you've got a great background, I think, to navigate that, because that is the world of the, from your time in California.
Sure.
Does it feel faster today to you than it's ever been, or are you feeling like this is just another, AI and blockchain and some of these things that are coming down the road are just, we've done it before, we just have to put our processes in place?
It's the latter.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned Moore's law. I was at Intel, and was literally taught Moore's law, so that was ingrained into me very early in my career. So, and has been something I've thought a lot about. Yeah, I mean, so one way I think about that is, Gartner. Gartner, the hype cycle. I always think about that when I think about AI. Think about, and we could list off all the technologies over the past 10, 20 years. People were like, oh my God, when I was, at Intel, it was 3D. 3D is changing gaming on a computer. What's that going to mean? Oh, wow, it's going to compete with game console. Like, we can go on and on and on, right? So I don't worry about it. What I try to do is calm people down and say, you know what? Yep, we should absolutely understand what AI and machine learning mean to us, but let's do it in a calm, analytical way.
Yeah.
Let's
an intentional way.
Yeah, let's analyze the markets. Let's talk to people that are smarter than us. Let's look at our competitors. Let's, again, go back to what pain points do we have? Where are we really seeing opportunity? And then we can take action. And that's where some companies get really caught up in the hype, and they're not paying attention to the fact that this is a movie that's been done every couple of years. It's just been called something else, but it's the same plot. So be careful that you don't overinvest or underinvest, but in this case, overinvest.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like don't be a day trader with innovation. Don't jump on it just because everybody else is buying in. It seems, wait, kind of be a little bit more sturdy and level with it. Yeah. But also, you need to make sure that you're not too late. That's again part of your role, is to say we don't want to be caught on our toes and all of a sudden our competition's got something it's going to take us 2 years to catch up with, right? Yeah, no, yes. And what I've seen from an innovation standpoint is that the frameworks that I really love are very customer centric. So that it's not about me being smart or the team that I work with being smart. It's what is the market telling you? At the end of the day, what are your customers telling you? And so, there are some innovation approaches that are anchored in talking to customers. And like literally you start with customers, you work with customers, you finish with customers. It's all about that. And it sounds like a cliche, but it really isn't. At the end of the day, unless you're running nonprofits, and there are nonprofits that are doing awesome things, but most of us are working for profitable companies, right? We're trying to be a profitable company. So
you got to do things that your customers are going to pay for, they're going to value. And if you have the type of dialogue with them where you can actually talk about what they are trying to solve for, that's when magical things can happen.
But there's so many examples of great companies. You mentioned Motorola.
Yeah.
That have been caught with innovation that's come from a competitor, and maybe they didn't even perceive the competitor. So did you learn anything? I mean, like how do you prevent that? If you're a company and maybe everything's going great, how do you try to mitigate the risk of being caught by surprise?
Yeah, good question. So it goes back to something I said before, which is, what's your culture at the executive level?
Okay.
And at your board level, and especially for public companies who have an important responsibility, fiduciary responsibility. On one hand, they're going to be more conservative. On the other hand, if they miss something, they'll be held accountable. So when I think of Motorola, which is terrific company, and it was great. I had a great experience there. Learned about the mobile industry and many other things. But this is a company that and this is well documented, had a lot of innovation. But what I saw working in the mobile devices business was a company that was very had a lot of this is like, to put a timestamp on it, the Razor had been the accidental success that kind of saved the mobile business for several years, and then the company leveraged that, and I joined right after the Razor became like a big success. They started saying, oh, let's invest in other people coming in that aren't from Motorola. So that's how I even got a job there. What I saw was that, and this is an example I think that applies to so many companies, is that the company did not have a culture of really planning for being disrupted. So I'll never forget. And while very customer centric, the mobile network operators, the carriers, they controlled and dominated, the culture of what was built at the company. What was missing was they were not cognizant of the fact that there was incredible disruption that they had invited into the house when Motorola did the music device with Apple. There was a music device called the Rocker, ROKR, and that was the beginning of the end, right there. And so they at the time, there was an idea, oh, we can partner with Apple, and they were easy for me to say no, right? Because it's all played out, but they did not really respect the bigger picture that Steve Jobs is like a disruptor's disruptor. He had a brilliant strategy that played out. He basically treated his work with Motorola as a proof of concept for the iPhone. So last part of the story. So like when I was there, the iPhone came out. I was a leader in the global product marketing team. I was in charge of entertainment. So what was an entertainment experience going to be in a cell phone? That was my job. So I took everyone on my team. I said, we're all going to go to the Apple store and we're going to wait online with everybody, and we're all going to buy phones and expense them. And after they were, pissed at me for making them wait online at 7 a.m, we all got our iPhones. And then at Monday morning, we walked around the office, and people were like, what are you doing with that in here? Why did you bring these into the office? What are you trying to prove? And I was like, this is the future, and we're in trouble. And the fact, just the fact that there wasn't that receptivity to that, that spoke volumes and kind of portended what was going to happen over the ensuing years.
And so clearly, collaborative partnerships is one of the key ingredients in a successful innovation, right? So you can't keep everything. You can't keep everything internal, but that story shows that you have to do it carefully, right? Or
very carefully.
I like that you said you have to plan to be disruptive. That seems like a good starting point. And then if you can figure out, let's plan to disrupt too, but let's also plan to be disrupted, because then we'll be able to act faster on it, or have strategies in place that lessen the pain when we are.
I wouldn't necessarily say plan to be disrupted. I would say expect we could be disrupted.
Okay.
Assume your competitors don't have your best interest at heart, and keep your radar calibrated.
Yeah.
Invest in these things.
So what are you planning for in your current role that's going to be disruption coming? Or if you can share, what are some of the things that you're looking at that will be disrupted?
Yeah. So look, it's I'm not avoiding the question. It's early days. We are literally just forming that third leg of my stool, the innovation function. So we're literally hiring an innovation leader right now.
Oh, cool.
So we're, I get to, walk the talk from this podcast, right? So in a year, I can tell you what we did, but we're just getting started. But the hypotheses that we have, probably the biggest hypotheses are actually in the clinical trial space. So if you think about drug development, and I'm just learning, so I'm not going to call myself a subject matter expertise on, I'll sort of pose for a minute as I'm learning a lot at work. In a highly regulated world, technology, data, people, the people that are subjects of trials, there's an incredible amount of energy being put into how do you make, how you develop drugs more effectively, how do you make them more relevant to more diverse populations, and how do you do them in a decentralized way? So that's a very broad description, but when you think about data, there actually is something from an AI standpoint that needs to be understood. And there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies and solution providers have invested in AI. Some have invested hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of data scientists. So there are many different opportunities here. But I think as we think about the future of drug development, where does the science, collide with technology? So is there a day in the future where, we're all going to have custom drugs that are just built for us by some magical AI, and we get an Amazon delivered or a CVS delivered prescription that's literally only for us? Again, that's like Star Trek was to the cell phone. But what's going to happen next year? What's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I heard recently someone talking about a digital twin of yourself that you could have a medicine be tested digitally first.
Yep.
And it would kind of weed out some of the possible reactions that your body might have. And that, to your point, is like, the custom medication plan.
Right.
Minimally just the wearable is constantly measuring our health. That scares me. Sometimes I would rather just not know, but you can see a future in which that's beneficial for sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, a lot to think about, a lot of great advice that you've shared. We ask a couple questions at the end of each episode that could be more personal, maybe less about what you're currently doing. What's something that's you're looking forward to? Are you still playing music? Are you still playing video games? What's something you're looking forward to in the next 12 months?
Yeah. Couple things. So on the personal front, so we have 2 kids. One's in college, 2 daughters, and the second one, she actually starts in January. So a few months ago, I would have said I'm dreading being an empty nester, with my wife and our dogs. I'm starting to get psyched about that, the possibilities. And so that's something. And I also love to cook, and just continuing to experiment, in the kitchen.
Cool.
Yeah. And then on the work front, I am really excited to see what do we actually do from an innovation standpoint. What ideas can we unlock in a very customer partner oriented way? So those are the things I get psyched about.
Cool. Is there a resource that you found valuable to you in your career that you could recommend to others?
I love business books. Not all business books, but business books that are less about hype and more like the time tested ones. In the innovation space, I love Lean Customer Development by Cindy Alvarez.
Okay.
It's underneath the Eric Ries, who's basically the founder of Lean Startup. His most widely published book probably in the world. But that book in particular is something that I come back to, and I just the art of asking questions. So, and I think that the art of asking questions is probably the most powerful thing that I've carried in my toolkit. Yeah. So that's one. The second is, it's another book, The First 90 Days. So, I've had the opportunity to work at some really interesting companies. that book, it's Harvard Business School Press, has been, again, it's like hardwired into the way I work. So how do you take advantage of that time when you're first starting in a role? And it can be an existing role at a company, but that's, or it could be in a new company. But that, again, it starts with the art of asking questions. So that's, for me, I think, really critical. Then the other piece that I think about is, especially for folks that are early or mid-career, is finding great mentors. I was fortunate to have some really great mentors early in my career, and in this world of remote work and hybrid work, how do we help bring the next generations forward? I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but I think that's the thing. If I'm I've given advice to my daughters, whether they listen or not, we'll see. But finding those mentors that you aspire to be like, and is just, the human factor can't be overvalued.
It's great advice. Really appreciate your insights here. Excited to follow up. Maybe we won't wait a year, but excited to follow what you guys do roll out with, and to see how you transform and how you innovate. And again, can't thank you enough for the wisdom you've shared on this show today.
No problem. Well, hey, thanks for having me, and thanks for asking great questions.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.